Well, I was 12 years old when my family went to visit my mother's brother out in Washington, D.C. And what did they do with a 12-year-old child? Well, they had given me a little camera. So I was sort of intrigued with that. And they said, well, let's take you someplace where you could take a picture. I said, oh, good, good. So they took me to the zoo. And there were white polar bears. And that was exciting for a 12-year-old new photographer. So I was busy taking photographs of polar bears, my first photographs. And I just had a lot of fun with that. And I thought, hey, this is kind of fun. I can take pictures of things other than polar bears. And so I started photographing with my little camera. My parents had a double house and so on. So we lived in part of it and then made a gallery, also a photo gallery there. And it was the first one in Springfield, Ohio that was done that way. And wasn't too long before they picked up the idea, and the first thing you know, we had a regular photo gallery in Springfield, Ohio. Yes. And that exposed photography as a fine art to a lot of people that were interested, and that expanded. Yes, and we were very pleased with that. Yeah, I exhibited some of my own work in the gallery, and also friends and other people that were photography. And if they got interested in photography as an art form, we wanted to be sure to exhibit it so that people realized they were in art. And the photographer realized, well, I think I'm in art. And that's a very good feeling for those of us that have been involved in the art of photography. Yes. Well, I had the advantage of getting a Master of Fine Arts as a photographer with Ohio University first. So I had that ability, and then as having that degree, I could then be hired as a professor and so on. So that was the next step, was to be a professor of photography at Northern Illinois University, which is just outside Chicago. And started that, I was head of that department. We got that going. And that was my first experience, is really setting up the programs and teaching and getting it organized and so on. Well, I was interested in two parts of it. My family had their own businesses, so I was used to having a business or be involved in a business and so on. So I was interested in taking photographs that were suitable for business, but I also had a degree in art. So I was very interested also in the art side of photography, so that I would take pictures that didn't have any commercial value per se, but were interesting and were exhibited and so on. So it was a combination of having a business experience with my family's business, and then also my own business as the art side of photography. I was interested in both. Because if you're really involved with photography, whether you're a teacher or a serious photographer, you find things. I mean, things are there because you start to see things in a different way as a photographer. And you're more alert to possibilities as a photographer. I happen to be one who prefers to photograph people as compared with buildings. The buildings don't interest me near as much as people. And a good bit of my work has been with people. I considered myself at one point in my career a street photographer. I preferred to, I'm not really keen on big cities unless I'm in one with a camera, because there is so much things happening around you, to the people you see on the streets and so on. There's drama everywhere you look in a city if you're attuned to looking at drama, the way people relate to each other. And that's what a street photographer watches for. And it was good with the earlier cameras, the film cameras, because they have a very quick response. As soon as you push the shutter button, it recorded on the film. They were very quick to do that. There was virtually no delay between the time you pushed your shutter button and the time the camera decided, well, I guess I'll give the boss a picture, and so on, and it would happen. And that made a difference in how quick the camera responded. Because if you're working on the street and you're seeing things happen, you're seeing things happen, you're seeing things happen, you have to be quick in your response. And the film cameras were very quick in the response. So when the electronic cameras came along, the first ones were too slow between the time you saw something, pushed the shutter button, and the camera decided, well, I guess he wants to take a picture here, I'll go ahead. And you got a picture. But it was split seconds after what you saw. And so they're now quick. That's been corrected. But the early ones were a little too slow for those of us working on the streets in cities and so on, which was the primary thing for some of us that we consider ourselves street photographers. And we called it often street theater. Yeah. I think whoever was directing art at the Museum of Modern Art in Chicago, I think had a good name for it, related it to street theater. And he said what we photographers are doing is recording street theater. And that was it. Yeah, that made the difference. You were looking for things that people were relating to each other, and relationships, as it is in stage theater, is true. You've got to have some drama. You've got to see some action. You've got to see something relating to something else in ways that are interesting. And if you can record that, then you've got street theater recorded on film. Yeah. One time we had everybody in a class and they were thinking, well, we're doing regular class today. I said, well, today, sell your cameras to somebody else in the room. And they had inexpensive cameras because that's what we were working with at that time. So they started trading the cameras around. How much do you want for that? $4. $4, huh? Okay. I think I can afford that. And people were selling their cameras to each other because they were inexpensive and there wasn't a big deal to pay for them. And that excited them also, because then they started to see, you took the great photographs of that camera I sold you. I'm so glad to see you're making good use of it and this kind of thing. So we tried to have as much fun with developing your sense of using the camera as both an art developing thing in terms of the images, but also the fun of doing it and exchanging that with other people who are doing the same thing with the same ambition. I want to make the best images I can, and of course at the lowest price that I can afford. Yeah, so that makes a difference. Have fun with it. Photography, once you understand the thinking process, as you start making your own photographs, you begin to realize one of the persons who's learning a lot from your photography is you. And as you look at your own photographs, and if you have somebody who has a background in that kind of looking at images or explaining images. I had the good fortune of also have training in psychotherapy. And I could explain the psychology of what a student sees in the image, as well as the mechanics of making the image. And that helped also. Why I went to Europe was I had been in Europe as part of my army training and so on. So I was with the military. That's always cheap housing. and you can do that on a low budget if you've had the experience with military training and so on. And I had been in Europe as part of the military. So I knew Europe, and I had been in Europe for other purposes also. So I felt reasonably comfortable in Europe. Yeah, I'd had the good fortune of, in high school, they said, you got to take a foreign language. I think it'll be German. Okay. And then when I got to college, they said the same thing. You got to take a foreign language. So I took German because I had started that way. So I knew German, basic German. I could speak it. So I felt comfortable in Europe from that standpoint. I wanted to see what they were doing with photographic education in Europe. Their style of education is a little bit different than our American style, from the standpoint of it's usually more regular. You know, the pieces are put in together so that it's more this way. Our education is more informal in the United States, and it was, as we developed photography as a art form, it became also less formal than what Europe was teaching at the time. So I wanted to see what they were doing over there. So I took a leave from the college, which we're entitled to do over a period of time, and to see exactly what they were doing. I really taught in the sense of being aware of the world around you. That if you are thinking of photography, or if you're thinking of yourself or thinking of your culture, all of those are things that you can both capture with photography and better understand with photography. And that can make a difference in the way that you see the world around you. And that's important. I was walking, I don't even remember now why I was in New York, but I was walking down the sidewalk, and this young person came running up to me and said, "Oh, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Stewart." And it was one of my former students that I had taught at Northern Illinois. And she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I really apologize. I haven't taken a photograph now in quite a while." I said, "Oh, really? Well, let me ask you one question. Do you see the world differently now that you have taken a photography course than you were seeing it before you took the photography course?" And she said, "Oh, yes, I do. I see different things. I really see different things. I enjoy different things that I see, having had a photography course." I said, "Then there's no need to apologize. It has changed your world in a good way." She said, "Yes, it has. It has." I said, "Then forget the apologies. You learned what it was set out to do, is help you see the world in a different way that provided information for you personally that you're now using. No apology needed." Uncle Ed and the rest of my family. As a psychologist, you think about cultures, and what a culture thinks and what attitudes they have towards things. Well, I grew up in the Midwest. I'm a relative to farm families. And growing up in the Midwest, you see the approach of farm families, how they approach. Well, farm families in the Midwest think that, boy, the big things happen either on the West Coast in San Francisco and California and so on, or on the East Coast, New York, so and so, clear on up into Maine. I have cousins way up in Maine, and they think differently than those of us in the Midwest do, but exciting. And I thought, what if a farm family got it backwards? Got it backwards. They think that people on the West Coast dress in very fancy clothes and so on, and they use a lot of makeup so they look good in their business role and that sort of thing. The same thing with people on the East Coast. Something the ocean does to those people out there in both directions. What if they got it backwards? What if they thought, no, the people out there, they must wear masks. If you're a doctor, you have a sort of a doctor's mask. And if you're a politician, you have sort of a politician's mask that you wear, and so on. And that's how they get along doing things. So I wonder if I just photographed that as a possible congregation and number of people that live out there, culture. What if I photographed that? So I did. I did. But they got it backwards. They got it backwards. So that in their imagination, the people out there don't wear any clothes, but they wear masks. so they can look like a real doctor or a real politician or whatever. Huh? So I photographed that. And then I just made up a fictional name, Uncle Ed, and the rest of my family. So I have a whole lot of photographs of the people, people in the Midwest, the farm families, which was my heritage, the way they thought the world was out there. People not wearing any clothes, but all wearing a mask to show that they're a doctor or they're a lawyer or they're whatever, and so on. Well, one of the things as a teacher of photography, you want to know as much technical things as you can so you can explain them to students so they can try things. And one of the things that was happening at this time, this was after World War II, and those of us that were photographers, I was, semi-professional too. I mean, I worked for clients and so on, as well as teach. And so I had to know how do we do certain things in the darkroom with the camera and with the film and so on. And the more we worked with that, the more we got ideas about visual things that we could experiment with, then because we began to understand even better how the commercial film processes worked and so on. So we had ones where we could do things where we reversed the tonalities in the picture and so on. What was black originally would be white and vice versa and so on. So we could develop photographs that were based on the original image, but we'd switch them or invert them or have them do little things like this, whatever. We would insert technical images, film that had various kinds of electronic signals on film and so on. So when you're designing something that is electronic, you've got to have a film and the pattern of the flow and so on. Well, hey, they look kind of neat too, and you could combine them with certain other images. So it trained the student to start looking at even more expansive ways of making their images using the electronic kinds of things that were coming into action at that time in our history here. Yeah. That particular picture was made because it has all the white areas and patterns in it that look fictional. I mean, they don't look like anything exactly, but this is an image of a face, but it's broken up by white areas. Well, you just simply put something across the film or across the print when you're printing it under the enlarger. If you want it white, of course, you put something in there that keeps the light from the paper, the printing paper. Or if you want it black, just the opposite. Something that opens up an area that prints black when you print the print, and so on. So you had all sorts of flexibilities in changing the original image, depending on what you wanted to do. And there was so much electronics going on then that we would, shall we say, borrow a film from commercial photographers if they would freely let us use it, and then would combine those with an original image that's a realistic image, and so on. So you had electronic components like added to regular photographs, and so on. So that started to make different kinds of patterns and different kinds of thinking when you saw it, when you saw those electronic images also mixed with regular images of people or whatever. Yeah, that got exciting too, because you started looking at what can I put over the print before I expose it? What can I add to that and subtract from that? And so on, so that you began to get even more experimental with the way that you modified the original image from where you started. Mm-hmm. Often photographs of people, whatever. Mm-hmm. But you had those possibilities with the camera then. Personally, and I just held a photograph from Europe and say, wouldn't you rather study photography in Salzburg, Austria? And if you're living in the suburbs of Chicago, you're going to say, you bet. And they did. And so that was just an encouragement to get you to think about getting your photographic education in a broader scope than what you would if you just stayed in your own hometown to do it. Not that that was a bad thing to do, but we wanted you to expand that so that your vision of your hometown even changed as if you photographed it. I usually had a wider than normal viewpoint lens. I mean, that's just the way I like to see the world. I like to see it as wide a viewpoint as I can, because that makes more connections, there are more things happening, there are more things it relates to, and so on. And that's one thing that happens in the city. When you photograph on the street in the city, and I always used a wider lens than normal, and that you see things that are connected together that you just don't see just walking down the sidewalk. You're seeing other things, and you're preserving those things that you're seeing. And you can explain what you saw to people who say, well, why did you take that? Well, I'll tell you, that kind of thing. We're seeing the world differently, we're recording the world differently, and we can understand things about other people and other things about ourselves. There are always friends that say, well, why do you photograph so much? I said, well, look at it this way. I photograph the things I do understand so I can help explain them to other people. I photograph the things I don't understand so that I can help explain them to myself. And I did that for 71 years. 71 years, from the time I was 12 years old to the time I'm a little older now. Yes, and I've enjoyed it all the way through. Yes.